level is that to get to 350 degrees, we actually have to suck CO2 out of the atmosphere somehow. And I don't think we can do it by growing lots and lots of trees. So that really then gets back to one of the specialities that Ken Caldera deals with, and that's geoengineering. So that's something that has to be at least kept in the background of the options that might become necessary at some point in the future.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, so we have a lady here. If we need a bit of help from the production team passing the mic. And Gail, I don't know if you can help. So the mic is... Oh, well, you can be next. Thank you.
Well, this is Judy Saul here from Cape Town Television and South African Television. Nuclear power is actually a massive fossil fuel user. If you incorporate the amount of petrol that's used in order to extract it and the amount of energy that's used to refine it and then disposing of the tailings. So, and also it's a huge user of water. So as far as I'm concerned, nuclear in some cases is not even to be considered more even a net producer of energy. So I'm surprised to hear that such concerned people are supposed to advocating it.
Thank you very much. Should we take
life cycle assessments of CO2 emissions associated with different energy technologies place nuclear power as among the very lowest of CO2 emissions per kilowatt hour. And you can go to the most recent IPCC report, so that's a consensus statement. The water use is a concern. All power plants require substantial amounts of water for cooling, and that's an issue that needs to be addressed.
Only add to what Ken just told you by saying that it's true that light water reactors use large volumes of fresh water, and that's a problem. Some of the reactor designs we'd like to move to, so-called Generation 4, most of them are based on other coolants, like molten fluoride salts, and they don't have that particular problem. So there are ways at least to get around the water problem.
Yes, and the other issue is with fourth generation nuclear, which may be a few decades away, but fourth generation nuclear fast neutron reactors actually burn the waste fuel. So and furthermore, the waste from fourth generation reactors is a much smaller volume and with a much shorter lifetime than the waste from present day nuclear technology. So the next generation of reactors can solve the waste problem crucially, and also they have greater proliferation resistance. So there's technology, that has been developed within the United States and is being developed elsewhere, and actually is running in some parts of the world that will solve a lot of the problems that are related to present-day nuclear technology.
Just to add one comment to that, I think that question is an example of the great difficulty that nuclear power faces. I mean, the statement was just totally false. Nuclear power's carbon footprint, even if you use fossil fuels to build the nuclear plant, is among the smallest of any energy source that we know about, contrary to what the questioner said. And there was another point I was going to make, but I've forgotten what it was. Oh, well, yeah, water. The water use of nuclear power plants. That's one of the. We're going to have a workshop in China 2 weeks from now with some of the top experts in the United States and China. And that's one of the things which is very important to China. They want to have nuclear power in inland locations where they don't have water. And that's why one of the things we'll be focusing on is the new technologies that have very small, if any, water requirements.
Okay, well, I think that's answered that question. We have a question here. Please say where you're from.
My name is Jim Hansen. I come from DW German Television. I've got a question for Mr. Hansen, if possible. We've talked now a lot about the 2-degree goals, and the comments that I heard here is really that it's too high, the 2 degrees are too high. Yet, in the delegations, actually there are quite a few delegations that really still want to stick to the 2-degree goal, even if science says other things. So why is there still a lack of acknowledgement towards science?
Well, in my opinion, and maybe some of the other panelists would like to comment on this, I don't think the targets have been set based on science. They've been set, they are convenient. You know, the 2 degrees, I've gone to Germany and they tried to debate with the politicians there about the policies and their plans for decreasing CO2. They're building coal-fired power plants there. Though Germany is one, with the United States, the United Kingdom, are the 3 countries that are most responsible on a per capita basis of change. And yet their plans are, we're going to close our nuclear plants and we're going to start building renewables, and by the middle of the century, we may be in better shape. But when you build a new power plant, there's no intention of closing that down. And what the science says is we've got to phase off of fossil fuels. We shouldn't be building new fossil fuel power plants. It doesn't make sense. It's not consistent with what the science is doing.
Can we hold this?
Science
I'm going to ask a
doesn't tell us
question.
directly what we need to be doing. Science is about establishing facts. But because we're human beings who care about other people and we care about the environment, those facts speak to us and tell us as humans what we need to be doing. And I think all of us here feel that carbon dioxide emissions are dangerous and that there's no emission that's acceptable, that we need to be stopping all carbon dioxide emissions. I've likened it to mugging little old ladies, and we say, okay, what should our target be for the rate of mugging little old ladies? And we say, well, the target should be 0. That doesn't mean we necessarily think we're going to get there tomorrow, but it means that every mugging of a little old lady is a bad thing, and every carbon dioxide emission is a bad thing, and the target is 0.
Okay, thank you very much. So we have a question over here. Yes, gentlemen.
Jeffrey Dean, like Tom and others, write for a number of papers in the Evening Standard. And actually I wrote about advocating thorium in 1978. So I was possibly working on this rather before many of you, despite the slightly patronising attitude some of you have had towards the press today. I do have problems both with speed, but that's been covered, but with a level playing field. Because over 50 years, billions and billions have been poured into the nuclear industry, and it hasn't delivered. Very little by some since we put into solar and wind. I'm not saying that you are against it, but there has not been a level playing field between nuclear and the renewables. So to argue for it now seems to be pretentious in the extreme. And I'm not anti-nuclear, but I really think the scientists, you should research your facts and be a bit more accurate.
Oh my God.
So the nuclear industry hasn't delivered.
I'm going to have a first crack at that, okay? And other people can say. I probably differ a little bit from my colleagues in that I don't think it should be a level playing field. I think we should put much more money into nuclear and stop wasting a lot on covering the earth with solar panels. We can get to 30% and then you hit a brick wall. We've done the numbers, have you? You cannot power the world on renewables. You can't do it unless there's a miracle, all right? We've done the math. So I'm sorry, I take exception to you. You're all right?
Okay. Next question, please. So where do we have the microphone? Oh, there we are. Thank you. Yes, Miriam.
Hello. Yes, I have a question. Thank you. My question regards, considering all the evidence and science that you've just put forward, and that were very interesting to hear. My question is, how come and how would you explain that nuclear is so absent from the debate, and how come it is not much more being advocated by the different delegations and the media and so on?
Well, I can point out one or two points. What you find if you advocate, frankly, I've spoken to many scientists, and by far the majority agree that nuclear needs to be part of the solution. But when you stand up and say that, there's an anti-nuclear community, which I would characterize as quasi-religious, which just hammers you. And you have to spend a lot of your time trying to deal with that. I've even found that some of the, now that I'm no longer a government employee, I have to raise the funds to cover my group of 4 people. And there are a number of foundations. The foundation that had been my most reliable source while I was a government employee, because I like to speak out, is not part of my government job. But so I had to prove that I was not using government funds. So when I traveled, I had to get non-government funds to pay for that. Well, the foundation that provided the funds now will not give me a dime, because they are anti-nuclear. And so there's a lot of pressure on scientists just to keep their mouths shut. But we're at a point where we better not keep our mouths shut when we can see a story which has become very clear. And that is that it's a mirage to think that all renewables can provide all of the energy that we need and at the speed we need. China and India are using tremendous amounts of power, almost all coal, for their electric plants. And there's no way that they can power their steel mills and all the other factories that they're building products for us on solar panels. And they know that. The governments of China and India know that. They want modern, better, safer nuclear technology. And for the West not to help them is immoral, because we burned their share of the carbon budget. Now they're stuck. Either they want to get wealthy, they want to raise people out of poverty. They need energy to do that. You can't do it without energy. And so if they don't have an alternative, they're going to burn coal. And we should be helping them to find a clean alternative.
For some reason, the word renewable has gotten tied to this idea of mitigating climate change. And renewable doesn't mean good. I live in California. I work in a department full of ecologists. And renewable, in many cases, means dams that disrupt river ecosystems. Renewable often means cutting down trees and burning them in power plants. So renewable doesn't mean environmentally acceptable. It doesn't mean good. What we want are technologies that have a small environmental footprint that can provide the power needed to power civilization with having the smallest possible environmental footprint. What we want are technologies with small environmental footprints, and many of the renewable technologies are inherently distributed and require huge amounts of area or displace natural ecosystems. What we would like is as much land possible left in the world for nature, and to make our energy system as compact and walk as environmentally lightly as possible.
I would just come back to the major theme that we introduced outside this panel, is that what we're really trying to look for is the solution to this problem. And the solution isn't one panacea, it's a mixture of things. And we must not bring to that discussion ulterior motives. We should simply be trying to fix the problem in the way that's most satisfactory from an economic standpoint and from an environmental standpoint as well. That's what I think we're all here to do.
Can I just say a few words, and that is that the questioner's statement was true. I mean, there is a large amount of public opinion, and it varies from country to country as well, that is, I shouldn't say directly anti-nuclear, but certainly pro what are called renewables to a fault, without being realistic about or renewable energy. And part of the reason why we're here and why we're talking about the need to focus a little bit more seriously on nuclear energy is to change public opinion, to educate people with engineering, technical and scientific facts.
I'd like to just briefly respond to a prior question about nuclear has not delivered. In fact, if you look at France, for example, it has most of its electricity from nuclear power, and if you compare the electricity price in France and Germany, it's about half in France what it is in Germany. And that's, of course, an old technology that France is using. But if you look at Sweden, for example, they have carbon-free electricity. That's the solution to the climate problem. If we have carbon-free electricity in all countries, we've solved the problem, because we can make liquid fuels for transportation from energy if you have abundant carbon-free electricity. And the way Sweden did it was in 10 years to build nuclear power plants and combine that with hydropower. So renewable energy plus nuclear energy provides them carbon-free electricity. And that's what we need. One final comment is to say that nuclear has been subsidized. In fact, it's not really true. In the United States, the government collects from nuclear power a small percentage, adds that to the electricity bill, and they collected more than $30 billion to pay for the handling the nuclear waste. And then they just take the money and put it in the federal pot, rather than actually getting a waste disposal system. But nuclear can pay for itself on the long run.
Okay, we have one more question here, but the lady. Thank you.
Mindy Aller, citizensvoice.tv. And I have a question about policy. When you talk about creating an equal playing field for all these technologies, what types of governmental policies, such as is it a price on carbon, that would help the most carbon neutral technologies shine through? I'd like to hear that.
We're physical scientists and not policy experts, and so you have to take our policy recommendations as our own sort of normal citizens saying what we think. But I'm in favor of a strong and rapidly escalating price on carbon as sending the clearest signals to the markets. But it's not just going to be a price on carbon, because if you're going to say you have a solar system, you need a big electricity grid, and there's going to have to be public policy to facilitate that continental scale electricity grid. And so the price on carbon is essential, but there will have to be additional policy measures to help individual technologies.
It's very crowded.
Can I just say one more thing? Just that I would like to point out that this COP meeting is a little different treatment of nuclear power than under different previous meetings under the Framework Convention, in that for this meeting, each country is allowed to say what it plans to do to help meet its emission targets, and many countries are bringing nuclear in as part of the mix. I know the United States, for example, is including nuclear power as one of the technologies it plans to use to meet its climate goals. And so really this is, I think, a change of the UN Framework Convention, that countries are bringing in nuclear power as a way to meet climate goals.
this working? Yeah. Okay, one other thing about policy. You know, one question implied that nuclear was getting subsidies. Well, when you put a renewable portfolio standard on utilities and say you've got to get 20%, 30%, whatever percent of your power from renewables, it is an incredible subsidy. Because the total cost is then passed on to all the ratepayers, and it's kind of hidden. There's no direct subsidy, but all of the costs are then incorporated into the electricity cost. So the more honest way to do this is to say, well, let's simply put a price on carbon, and then it's a fair playing field for it. That will help renewables, that will help nuclear power, it will help energy efficiency, and that's the way we should do it. Let the market decide, help us decide what is most efficient.
And if you are going to do it in terms of standards, it could be standards in terms of how much CO2 you emit per kilowatt hour or per mile or kilometer driven. And so make it a technology neutral standard and not a technology specific standard.
Mitchell with in Australia. You mentioned this sort of issue around the poor needing access to power, and that India and China are expanding the coal sector massively. Our environment minister was asked yesterday why he didn't look at Carmichael coal mine, which really humongous one in Queensland. And he said that it would be neo-colonial of him to not approve that coal mine effectively. I was just wondering if you could sort of respond to that in the context of the cost to the poor in terms of health and other issues. And, you know, the way that Australia is approving vast amounts of new carbon programs.
Yeah, well, as I'm from Australia, I could make a comment, and this is my personal view. I think one of the problems with opening up new coal mines is that they have a decadal or multi-decadal lifetime. And so, although the coal in Australia is, much of it is exported, we should take responsibility for the coal that is mined in Australia and sold overseas. Personally, I'm against opening up new coal mines. But I can understand the economics and the issues of jobs and so on. So it is a difficult decision to be made, and it's even more difficult if you're a politician, of course. So, I respect that these decisions are not taken lightly, even if I disagree with them.
Yeah, David Holmes from The Conversation in Australia. One of the panelists, I don't remember which one, mentioned geoengineering. And I've got a question about, you talked about it as a kind of insurance policy. If maybe nuclear isn't working, you can throw that into the mix. But what I know is that fossil fuel companies have some vested interest in geoengineering, in that it allows them to delay action on climate change, keep fossil fuel going on the basis that, humans can be Earth masters again and be in control with geoengineering. So is that the view of the entire panel? And I'm sorry if I'm going to put a wedge between members of the panel here.
First of all, I think the premise of the question is false, because the people who are interested in researching geoengineering are interested in it because they think the results of our carbon dioxide emissions could well be catastrophic. And in order to think that it's worth researching, we have to say that our carbon dioxide emissions will have catastrophic outcomes. And I don't think that's a position that the fossil fuel companies want. And so, and I think the reason we're here on this panel saying that we need to deploy near zero emission energy technologies today is so that we don't deploy geoengineering technologies tomorrow. So
you don't think it'll become an apology for some fossil fuel companies?
I don't. In order to think you need to research geoengineering, to acknowledge that our CO2 emissions could have catastrophic consequences, and I don't think the fossil fuel companies are ready to do that.
Hi, I'm James Jordan from EnviroBeat. Considering Fukushima's near miss of really contaminating Tokyo, I think there's still going to be an uphill battle to convince people popularity-wise. Now, Stanford's Mark Jacobson has put forward a 100% renewable plan for all sectors with wind, water, and sunlight. Maybe you could comment on his work, because if there's an option that doesn't involve nuclear with the risk of proliferation and contamination, why wouldn't we take it?
I'll just get the ball rolling by simply saying that all forms of power entail risk, right? And that includes solar, and it includes wind. It does. Actually, mortality per kilowatt hour for solar and wind are larger historically than for nuclear. That's an established fact. But to get to the point, can we do it all with solar and wind? There are two issues. Is that the right question to ask? Is that the best way for us to, does that actually minimize environmental impacts? Does it minimize human health risks? That's a fair question to ask. I'll pass the baton.
Yeah, this is something I can't vouch for, but one of the people on the panel mentioned it while we were having lunch. Mark Jacobson's work is very interesting, and I think it is seriously flawed in many areas. But just to give you one example, I think, there's this issue of intermittency, that the sun doesn't shine at night, the wind doesn't blow all the time, and, if we have computerized global, nationwide for the USA grid that optimizes the distribution of power, so when the wind's blowing in one place and not in another, then we can shift the electricity from one place to another. That's fine. That gets rid of part of the issue of intermittency in a limited way. But I think that what Mark Jacobson says is that another way to help solve that intermittency problem is to build a whole lot of dams so that we have hydro backup. And that, as Ken Caldera has mentioned, building another 50 Hoover dams in the United States would have a serious environmental impacts, and doing that worldwide would have devastating impacts on the lesser developed nations of the world. So I think that there are issues of social responsibility that are not addressed by a lot of things that come out of people's work, like Jacobson's work in particular.
Without going into detail, if you make unrealistic assumptions, you can end up with unrealistic conclusions, and I think that's what Mark Jacobson has done. The goal is not to make a renewable energy system. The goal is to make the most environmentally advantageous energy system we can while providing us with affordable power. And I think if a clear analysis of that will show that nuclear will be part of that story.
We have a question from this lady.
My question is twofold. One, I'm particularly worried about the waste in nuclear power. Oh, sorry. Jane Lapiner, I'm from the North Coast Bureau in Northern California. And because there's been no civilization on Earth that has lasted long enough to protect the waste for its half-life, I forget what it is, many thousand, 100,000 years. So that's one question that I really worry about. And the other is, I understand what you're saying about the intermittency of solar power, for instance, but couldn't the money that is being spent on, for instance, nuclear power plants, billions of dollars that was mentioned, be put to figuring out how ways of storing energy so that we don't have the intermittency problem? And maybe it could be done faster in the 15 years of building it takes to build a nuclear power.
Okay.
Let me start off simply by...
Pass the microphone.
Let me start off by saying that the nuclear waste problem you brought up is a serious issue that needs to be tackled in any kind of system that involves nuclear fission. Down the road, there's some hope we may be able to transition to fusion, which does not have that problem. Waste is a serious problem. You can't make it go away. I would only say that this is something that's potentially solvable in several different ways. One is injecting the waste very deep into the earth, into deep boreholes. That's been researched. A better way was already mentioned by my colleague Tom Wigley earlier in this conversation, is in the next generation of fission reactors will burn a lot of that waste in a nuclear sense. So one of the things about that waste, we call it waste, but 95% of it is potentially fuel for another reactor. And so it's waste in two senses of the word. It's wasted energy. And by burning it, you make it far less dangerous and far less voluminous. Now, about your second question, should we take money from nuclear and put it in solar? I think you'd find that all four of us, and we've said it repeatedly, think we should move on all fronts. It's not this or that. We should be pushing everything to the level that it makes sense.
And if I could add something to that, if we put a carbon price that's rising over time, then the question of where we should invest the money, in solar or nuclear or what combination, how much of this and how much of that, will be decided by the professionals who provide our energy, and will let the alternative technologies compete. But to make the decision beforehand that we're going to go all renewables and we're going to figure out storage and it'll be affordable is an extremely unwise commitment to make for our children. And the young people that I've talked to and going around to college campuses, many of them are a bit unhappy about the old geezers who are going around and trying to commit young people to future, which they'll be stuck with if we continue to pretend that renewables are capable of providing all of our energy in the near term. They want to use all of the technologies at our disposal and let them compete.
Tom Blaise from the Science Council for Global Initiatives. We're a nonprofit think tank, and our goal is to provide energy egalitarianism so that everyone on the planet can have a raised standard of living. So just looking at how much energy an American uses today, if we had everyone on the planet using half that much energy in 2050 with the anticipated population increase, it would take, according to Mark Jacobson's own figures on the land use needed for wind and solar panels, it would take, you would have to cover the entire continent of South America with wind and solar panels. Whereas with advanced nuclear power, you'd have to cover an area the size of Buenos Aires. So, the question is, who's willing to do that much environmental damage, not just from the materials that go into wind and solar, but just from covering that much land? It's absolutely unfeasible, both economically and environmentally.
That was a statement and not a question, but I can say that it's consistent with what I said earlier, that what we want is high-density power sources so that we can leave as much land as possible available for nature and other purposes.
My name is Wolfram Müller. I'm a German, European, and world citizen. Well, one issue about atomic energy is also an issue about politics in third world countries. Germany, Siemens, delivered power plants to Iran in the 70s, at the time when the Shah was in power. And that turned out to be a big problem. I mean, whenever we give power, electric, like the science about nuclear energy to countries in unpolitical, stable societies, we do have a potential problem, very huge. Another short remark is about math. In Germany, the percentage of renewable energy was 33% this year, and Germany is far from having every piece of land full of solar panels. So I kind of doubt this this idea that you cannot thrive and live on energy on renewables. We have just look at the Sahara. I mean, another political difficult issue, but that would be another comment I have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm so glad Germany's come up. So.
Let me address your first point. I think the real, if you ask me what the most serious risk of nuclear is, it's something like what you mentioned, it's the potential for proliferation. And that can't be made to go away, although it can be minimized by careful governance and so forth. I would really point out that if Germany, France, and the United States, countries like that, are not developing, advancing both nuclear energy and nuclear policy, right, other countries will and are. We might be able collectively to stop Western Europe and North America from advancing nuclear power, but we're not going to stop China and Russia and a whole bunch of other countries from doing that. So the issue on proliferation may come down to, who is building and marketing the best designs and coming up with the best policy. Maybe you'd like to check that.
I think there's some differences on the panel here that, my vision of what energy system I would like to see eventually, I think I'd like to see solar power around the world and global electric grids that could wheel energy from day to night. But we don't have the storage technologies or the transmission technologies to do that today. And so the question is, what near zero emission technologies can we deploy today? And so I think we should be building nuclear power plants today, but I see that as transition to some long-term sustainable future energy system.
Okay. We have a microphone over here, and a question: if there's any journalists, we're running quite short on time at this point, so we're going to take a few more questions. Maybe we'll take this question from this gentleman. Is there another journalist here in this area that would like to ask? Okay, go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, the next German. Bernhard Kötter with the German newspaper Die Tageszeit. I was wondering if you could tell us something on the economic side of your study. Are those your calculations that nuclear energy in that sense is cheaper, is economically feasible, or where'd you get it? As far as what I see from the brochure, I decided to see if you calculated the cost for waste disposal in there. And I'm asking this because here in France there's a big debate on the cost of nuclear energy. Both EDF and Alibaba, the big companies here are basically broke, with tens of billions in the debt, and EDF basically asking for a price hike of 30% in the electricity. So I was wondering what's the basis for these calculations?
I can make a couple of comments relevant to that question, and then I'll pass the microphone. If you followed the present, the power plant that France and Europe is building in Finland, and their incompetence in doing that, and frankly choosing a design which inherently is going to be exceedingly difficult, then I would be skeptical about the role of nuclear power. But there's no reason that you need to let that be the source of future nuclear power. If you look even at China today, they're able to build a power plant in 5 years for $2 billion, which in the United States would probably take you 15 years. I have a long history working with environmentalists and listening to their strategies, and many of them are anti-nuclear. And part of their admitted strategy was, let's make it as difficult as possible to build a nuclear power plant. And it takes 15 years in the United States. And that makes it expensive. But there are options now. There are, you'll have to get to the point of where you have a standard design possibly even a modular design that you make in a factory. And I'm sure that China and India are going to go those paths, and they're going to find ways to build nuclear that will be very cost competitive. But as I say, competing, put a price on carbon and let these technologies compete. And my bet would be that nuclear would do very well, but that remains to be proven.
When solar and wind are too expensive, people say, let's do deployment to drive down the learning curve, let's do R&D to make the technology cheaper. If nuclear power is too expensive, we should treat it the same way we treat solar and wind and say, let's drive down the learning curve, let's do the R&D to make it less expensive.
I just want to say one little thing about waste, and that is, right now, in many parts of the world, we are storing waste on site in dry cask containers, and they're meant to have a safe lifetime of maybe 300 years. At Fukushima, for example, a lot of waste was stored in dry casks, and they survived the tsunami perfectly well. So that's a very secure way on a multi-century timescale, 100 to 200 years or so, of storing waste while we figure out the best possible way to store waste on a longer timescale. Now, I mentioned already that next generation neutron reactors have much less waste, and the very long-lived actinides, the plutonium, for example, are used up to produce energy. So, the million-year timescale issue basically disappears if we go to the next generation of nuclear technology. I could go on a lot about waste in this. There's a little bit about waste in this nuclear energy fact sheet, which fleshes out some of the things that I've said.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. I'm Yves Marignac. I'm running a small consultancy office in France called Wise Paris. We just produced a report on nuclear and climate issue commissioned by the French Climate Action Network, and which concludes that in terms of efficiency and consistency, nuclear is not a good option. I could discuss a lot, of course, but I won't. I just simply want to say that your defiance towards renewables and your confidence towards nuclear power is kind of the opposite of their current dynamics to deliver carbon-free electricity. But I have just one question, which comes back to the debate we had in France 2 years ago about our energy transition, and I was part of the team with the minister organizing it, which concluded that the most effective scenarios to get our emissions in France down fourfold, which is what we need to be in the 2 degrees scenarios. The most effective scenarios are those where nuclear power is either phasing out or at least reducing, and not those